Hi, I'm Richard Hill, and I welcome you back to the talks on psychological first aid. This video is part 2 of our 2-part series. So if you haven't had a chance to go through part 1 yet, watch the principles of psychological first aid video and then return to this one. In the first video, we looked at the 5 principles that are the basis for all psychological first aid. That is promoting safety, calmness, self-efficacy, connectedness, and hope. We noted that these principles dictate how the helping happens regardless of the particular circumstances in which the first aid is delivered. I identified the factors and groups which are at greater risk, and also the protective factors, the qualities and situations which tend to help people survive better. Now, firstly, we named the chief symptoms, or finally, we named the chief symptoms of the stress reaction that you might see as you get into the field. But in this talk, I'll be putting you into the field. That is, our explanation will take us through the traumatising journey of a family whose members escape a horrific bushfire with their lives and not much else. As the psychological first aider, you will be engaging with them. You will get to see them on a very personal level and how the 8 core actions of psychological first aid come into play with the survivors that they are designed to assist. After you help the family, we'll look at the competencies which allowed you to render assistance and any you may still need to develop. And just before we bring you to the disaster scene now, let's take a moment to name the core actions of the psychological first aid and briefly have you assess how ready for the field, a field experience you might be. As we said in part 1, the core actions spring from the 5 principles, and all 8 of the actions need to be looked into when helping survivors and trauma-affected people. Although not all 8 will be uniformly central to your helping efforts, the 8 core actions are contacting and engaging survivors, tending to needs for safety and comfort, stabilising survivors, gathering information about needs and current concerns, providing practical assistance, connecting survivors with social supports, giving information on coping, and linking survivors with collaborative services. So, are you ready to put on your volunteer's cap? So let's meet the Maninis. For the next half hour or so, let's say your name is Chris Johnson and you live in Melbourne. You're a counsellor and you've put your name down on the list to be called should there be an emergency situation requiring volunteers to go to a disaster scene and assist traumatised people. It is the first week in January, and you, like many in your area, have been lamenting the relentless hot, dry days with no let-up. The temperatures have been soaring to 45 degrees Celsius and humidity as low as 7%. Remembering the Canberra fires and Black Saturday, when the temperature was at a record 46 degrees, many of you are nervously eyeing the sky, aware that drought and high heat bring perfect bushfire weather conditions. Then you hear it on the news. There are blazes burning northeast of Melbourne, in the same general area so profoundly affected by the Black Saturday fires. The authorities say the fires are not close to any communities and that they hope to contain them within a day or two, but you're not so sure. You're glad that, well, because it's still holiday season, your client load is light at the moment. You remind your partner that you're on the list and that should you get the call, you might be suddenly away for a week or maybe 2. The hours roll on slowly as Victoria waits and watches And just when the firefighters think they have the largest blaze more or less contained, winds whip up trouble and several more blazes start, this time closer to a number of rural communities. Civil authorities say that probably no one will need to be evacuated, but they caution residents in the area to stay tuned via radio, email, text messages and phone. Then suddenly there is a change of wind direction and it's all on. 4 individual fires begin to burn towards one another, coming to encircle 6 small townships lying between them. The sky darkens and the smell of burnt wood hangs heavy in the air. Residents living in the communities between the blazes have been told to evacuate. But frighteningly, authorities are concerned that there may not be enough of an evacuation corridor to get everyone out. Residents are told which communities will be safe to head for and by which roads. Police, personnel from the County Fire Authority, they go in. They try to ensure that everyone's out. They say individuals must not stay to defend their homes as the blazes are intense and they're beginning to completely surround the towns. 3 hours later, you hear on the news that the fires have joined, becoming a fire complex. Everything in the superfire's path is expected to be incinerated. Those at-risk townships. It seems that nearly 2,000 homes in at least 5 of the affected communities will be razed, and up to 6,000 people will now be homeless. Authorities do not know yet if everyone has got out. The phone rings. Are you available to come assist some of the several thousand evacuees who will soon be at a nearby community shelter? In signing up to become a possible psychological first aider, you were sent a form to assess your readiness to serve in this way. It lists 4 major factors: capacity to endure what you may see and experience in the field, health, family, and work considerations. You're pleased that you can, at least for this disaster, knock the work factor off. As a self-employed counsellor in private practice, you determine your own schedule, and right now in the peak of summer, you have few active clients that you can find a locum counsellor to assist. You acknowledge that health readiness might be a significant issue for some, but you're mentally and physically well, with no recent surgeries, no nagging injuries or recent life losses. Most people are amazed at your stamina, which you are told will come in handy over the long days in the field. Your family consists in a stable relationship with your partner and your dog. And as you do not have any children, you're not sure about the dog, but your partner knows how important this is and is highly supportive. You know that your household will be kept running smoothly for the 2 weeks or so that you might be gone. So all of this leaves only your personal readiness to be able to tolerate seeing distressed people in chaotic conditions and possibly hostile survivors who do not want your help. You know that you could encounter a micromanaging supervisor in the chain of command, or just the opposite, one who does not give you any particular or sufficient support at all. You are aware that you could be going into an environment which is harmful to health, and ultimately you have been told that you will probably not be doing normal counselling tasks. So, after reflection, you decide that all of the above is okay with you. You give yourself the thumbs up for the experience, and you buy your ticket to get there. Duffel bag in hand, you make your way to the central coordinating station at the high school gym in one community where many evacuees have been sent. The gym and surrounding areas look chaotic, with people scurrying in every direction and dazed evacuees quickly claiming available floor space. You report to the supervisor in the disaster's chain of command. You're welcomed, but somewhat tersely told to go and see who needs help. A little shock at the simplistic instructions, or rather lack thereof, you begin wandering among the aisles of mats and blankets spread around the gym. You are a freshly graduated psychological first aider on your first deployment, so you're praying you're able to do it right, or at least do no harm. You've memorized the 8 core actions, so you know that your first job is to work out who needs or would like your help and introduce yourself. You see an older woman sitting on a plastic chair, staring straight ahead, looking pale and in shock. You're about to approach when you see that another orange-vested volunteer brings her a glass of water and begins to talk to her. So you move on, spotting a young boy of about 2 or 3 running in the aisle, seemingly alone. He's screaming and crying. Well, who's he with? You wonder as you passed. Just then, an adult sweeps him up and carries him away, still screaming, to one of the mats. So you keep walking, suddenly aware of the awesome responsibility. What if you spend time with those who are not that bad off, while some family who really is hurting goes unnoticed? Difficult question. Suddenly you see someone approaching you, wild-eyed. He has thick black tousled hair and a t-shirt with burn holes in it. He looks dusty and exhausted. In strongly accented English, he asks if you are a helper. The man's name is Giuseppe Menini, and he says to call him Joe. He says he doesn't speak English that well, and as he and his family only emigrated from Italy 4 or 5 years ago, about a month, you note, before the Black Saturday fires. You look around the gym, desperately hoping to spot some unused area where you and Joe could sit and have a chat, as you're aware how important privacy is. Seeing nothing, you guide him outside, where almost unbelievably there are 2 plastic chairs in the shade of a tree. Joe seems reluctant to move outside and looks desperate to talk. You introduce yourself and calmly say that Joe looks concerned. Is this something you can help him with right now? Joe's words come out in a rush. His mother can't breathe properly, he says. He half describes, half out someone gasping for breath and repeats, "A machine, my mother needs a breathing machine." If it's oxygen she needs, you know you must move fast, especially in the smoke-filled air of this community so close to the fires. You rise to alert medical authorities, but before you get anywhere, Joe grabs your hands and pleads, "Please, my daughter, she is not home when they make us go. I don't know where she is." He breaks down. "And my son must have medicine soon." 3 serious situations in just one family. You guess that you have now arrived on the scene. Joe leads you back to the family mat. A woman in her early 60s is seated on the floor, bent over and indeed gasping for breath. You take in a younger woman who Joe says is his wife, Sophia, and she's holding a young boy of about 4 in her arms. He looks listless, he's shallow breathing, and he's been vomiting. Sophia looks dazed. You know the medical situations must be sorted out immediately, so you look at Joe's mother and tell her you will get her some help now. Joe tells you she doesn't speak much English, but she nods between gasps. To your amazement, one of the volunteer docs manages to nab a portable oxygen container, and by luck, the Menini family mat is close to a wall with a socket so his mother can plug in and have continuous oxygen. As her breathing settles down, the doctor examines Joe's son, Pepe. Joe seems to be explaining that there was no time to grab things like his mother-in-law's breathing aids or his son's medication, as the county fire authority personnel gave them 5 minutes to get out. Joe is explaining his son's condition. Sugar sickness, he says. The doctor disappears, returning with a machine to measure blood sugar levels and confirms that the child's glucose levels are spiking out of control. He asks for the name of the Manini's family doctor. Joe looks sad. Their whole community had to evacuate, he explained. The doctor too. Joe doesn't know how to get in touch with him. The doctor here sees that Peppy needs both fluids and insulin, and soon. He tells you that he will be back quickly with the insulin, but the fluid should be administered by IV. Not so easy from the mobile medical station setup. You ask about Joe's daughter. He says that Marissa is 11 and had gone to a friend's house several kilometres away for the day. There is no mobile coverage at the friend's house, and no one answered when Joe rang their landline upon receiving orders to evacuate. The CFA people told him he could not remain at his home and wait for her. He would be incinerated, and that in any case, the friend's family will have been evacuated too. Marissa was probably with them, they suggest. Joe is clearly distressed, as he does not know where she is or where to begin finding her. He starts sobbing uncontrollably. He says he is a bad father to have come without her, and that his life is nothing without his cherished daughter. Sophia says nothing at all, but the despair in her eyes tells it all. You can feel the adrenaline coursing through your system as your skills kick into high gear. You realize that Joe needs to be calm, reassured, and reconnected in order to feel safe. The biggest reassurance he can get is that his daughter is okay, even if she's not with him. You suggest that perhaps Marissa could have been brought to a different centre, and ask Joe if he would like to come with you to go find out if Marissa and her friend's family have registered at one of the other shelters. You make sure that the Maninis are registered at this centre, and ask the coordinators at the missing persons desk to get back to you when they find out if Marissa is at a different shelter. Back at the mat, you can see that all of the Maninis are thirsty and hungry, and Mrs. Manini's back is hurting. You recruit Joe to help you get extra pillows, and then you show Joe where the food queue is, standing in it with him to bring back enough meals for all of them. After the Maninis have had their meal, they're more comfortable, no longer so hungry or overtly distressed. Mrs. Manini, however, is still not right. Her breathing on the oxygen machine is okay, but she seems to be staring vacantly and she's trembling. You think she could be disoriented. Joe mentions that this is the second time for them, as they had just arrived in Australia when the Black Saturday fires raged. His mother coped at the time, but he says she doesn't feel safe now. Last time, they lost only meagre possessions and a rented home. This time, the fire was scheduled to wipe out their own home, a tiny old cottage they'd struggled for 4 years as new immigrants to be able to afford. Much of the money from the deposit came from Joe's mother. Mrs. Manini had to leave behind her precious photos from Italy too, as there wasn't time to collect them. You get Joe to translate for you and begin to try to stabilise her, explaining that her distress is a normal reaction to a very abnormal situation. But she is safe now. The fires will not come here. You go over some other grounding techniques with her while Joe and Sophia look on. Then you invite her to name 5 non-upsetting things she can see in the gym. You model doing this, saying, I see a wallpaper. I see a baby drinking milk. Oh, I see a purple chair. Mrs. Manini looks at you curiously for a moment, and then she says indignantly in Italian, I'm not an idiot. You're giving me kindergarten things to do. Joe and Sophia burst out laughing, and you realise that another first aid task has been completed. They wouldn't laugh or get insulted about grounding techniques if they were still disoriented. So, on to the next step of psychological first aid. You approach the task of asking about further needs and concerns quite cautiously, as you do not believe the Maninis should begin spontaneously debriefing in their terror-filled detail about their last moments in their home. You still need to know a bit more, however. You ask if they can talk to them, if you really could talk to them when they feel more rested about what else they need. They seem to be developing a trusting bond with you, and say, well, they're ready to talk more now. Sophia confirms that they will, again, lose all their possessions, but that this time this includes their home. You engage with them about their fears and their feelings and whether they saw anyone get hurt. In addition to grave concerns for their daughter, they are desperate to hear if Sophia's brother, Roberto, made it out. They wonder what is happening to contain the fire and how safe they are, even here at the shelter. So again, you accompany one of them, Sophia this time, to the missing persons desk and register a request for information on Roberto. You get a copy of the latest update on the fire and take it back to the family to let them know what is being done to keep everyone safe and to look for people who haven't turned up anywhere. You gradually take up the topic of social support and find that they used to be well connected to the Italian communities in the area. It's just that everyone is scattered now and they don't know where people have gone to. With deep sadness, they acknowledge the loss of community as well as home. Joe adds, my job will be gone too because my employer's business will be burned down, no more car repairs to do, no more garage. Before the fire, the Maninis would never have thought about taking up public support. They were fiercely independent and proud of it, especially given their former status as immigrants. Now they will be forced to accept help. You tell them about services that are and will be available to them for help in finding accommodation, for assistance getting their driver's license and other cards replaced, even where there's food and clothing for them, to help them get through until they're on their feet again. But you can look at them and you'll watch them closely to see if they seem too overwhelmed to take in what you're saying, knowing that you might have to go over it again, and perhaps again. Luckily, they do not seem to have issues of alcohol or substance abuse. This is something you always must watch for. But right now, they say their most worrying issues is that they don't know where Marissa is. And they were to have celebrated her 12th birthday, just days from now. Tears roll down Sophia's cheeks as she tells you this. You say, I can only imagine how devastated you must feel about everything you've told me so far. Is there any other information that you can think of that I should have? Anything else you'd like to tell me now so that I can help you better? As you sit on your army cot at the volunteers' tent much later that evening, your supervisor asks you how it all went. While you met a number of survivors, you find yourself drawn to the Maninis and you begin telling your supervisor about them. Let's just push the pause button on our unfolding survivor drama for a moment and answer that question. How did it go for you? What have you done well? What might have you forgotten to do? So full points to you for recognizing that someone approaching you was a high priority to engage with. You certainly tried to go for privacy, not realizing that there were immediate medical emergencies that rendered privacy less important. Tending to needs for safety and comfort. You were right to call the medical personnel over. Neither lung disease nor diabetes should be ignored. It was a real coup to be able to provide ongoing air to Mrs. Manini via the plug-in oxygen machine. Any oxygen tanks would have lasted a few hours, and then she would have been gasping for breath again. Little Pepe took more doing, as the IV fluids he needed had to be brought in from the local hospital. But helping Joe get the family registered and also register a request to search for his daughter at other centres was also important for the Manini's safety and comfort. They could enjoy the food that you helped them obtain, knowing that all that could be done for them was being done. Stabilising. Well, okay. The grounding technique with Mrs. Manini didn't seem to necessarily be appropriate for her, but there was a good result. And that was the ensuing laughter over the reaction that brought the family into the here and now, much more stabilised. Gathering information. Hearing that this fire is the second one the Maninis have survived in so few years living in Australia is really helpful in order to put all of their reactions into some kind of context. Knowing that they are gravely concerned for the safety of their daughter and brother is important. Realising that they will probably lose not only home and possessions, but also Joe's job, means that their recovery will be major. And tomorrow, you will gauge whether they have lost hope as well. Your supervisor is impressed with your assistance so far. You look ahead to the other 4 actions. You know that the step of providing practical assistance is crucial, both in terms of restoring hope and in terms of enhancing empowerment and dignity. It will be tricky because with several communities wiped out by the fires, resources are suddenly scarce. You head to the Manini's mat, hoping to be able to create an action plan, which you will help them to act on. Joe and Sophia greet you with a smile. Pepe is more active today, his blood sugar is back to normal, and Mrs. Manini appears to have forgiven you for kindergarten tasks. You ask about their immediate needs. Medical emergencies under control. They are now completely focused on finding out about Marissa and Roberto. Of course you are, you say. We will check again with the missing persons desk to see if there is an update. I'm wondering if you would also like to apply for some special government assistance to get you through until you're resettled. I can help you with filling out the forms if you like. Joe and Sophia still look a bit in shock, but they agree to do it. They also ask about getting ongoing insulin supplies for Pepe and how long Mrs. Manini can keep the portable oxygen container. You add those items to the action plan as well. You ask if they had insurance on their home, and you're relieved to hear that they did. They even think they remember the name of the insurance company. There will be some insurance people here tomorrow. Would you like me to make an appointment for you to meet with them? They agree, but they look less certain. You realise that in your desire to help, you could be making too large of an action plan for where they're at now in their recovery process. Then it dawns on you why they seem to lack motivation for insurance matters. They don't know for sure that their home has been burnt down, and they're still hopeful to avoid this fate. In fact, you haven't heard the latest either. You tell them that you'll find out when people can be expected to know if their homes have survived or not, and when people will be allowed to go back to their communities. You clarify the list of actions, and you agree to get back with them when you have the forms to fill in, when you have information on their missing loved ones. Over the next day or two, you ask if they would like to connect with any members of the community or any other social support people. Sophia and Mrs. Manini nod vigorously. Sophia would like to meet up with some members of the Italian community. Mrs. Manini could really appreciate seeing a priest and maybe getting some replacement rosary beads. You ask Sophia if she can help you go check out whether there are any members of the Italian community registered at the centre. She's pleased to find out that there are several families, although she doesn't know them really well. So you inquire about whether there are any priests here at the shelter. One is coming tomorrow, you're told, and will be giving a mass. He can also meet up with Joe's mother. The Maninis haven't asked about anything for Pepe, but you wonder if he would like to have a kind of, a big brother while he's at the centre. They're keen, and so is Pepe. So you head to the area for preteens and young teens and find that there's a very responsible 12-year-old boy who has volunteered to help watch and play with younger children. You introduce him to Pepe, whom he takes under his wing. Joe is the only person who hasn't made a request about hooking up with some kind of social support. You ask him what his needs might be. Thinking into the future, he asks whether there might be any job recruiters. It's a simple request, but in this economic climate, it's something that may be very difficult. You heard rumours of a speed dating event at the centre soon for prospective employers to meet with newly jobless survivors like Joe, and you go to check it out. You realise that the Maninis have responded fairly well to their situation in terms of their early post-disaster responses. Though shocked and exhausted, they have nevertheless managed to ask for what they need, accommodate themselves on the gym floor, and slowly begin that long trek back to normalcy. They've contained their panic about their daughter and brother. You're aware that there are many twists and turns on the journey to recovery, and, well, the Maninis are likely to go through several dips in the road. For instance, if they should find that their daughter or Sophia's brother hasn't made it out when the raising of their home is confirmed, as you are sure it will be, or when they try to re-establish themselves in work and accommodation. You have many helpful brochures on coping, but your dilemma is none of them is in Italian. You decide to approach the problem directly, and you let Joe and Sophia know that there is information available on how to get through this in English, French, Arabic, Mandarin, and Polish, but not in Italian. Would they like any of it, you ask? They take some English and French information sheets. You volunteer to go over it slowly with them if they wish. Sophia mentions that one of the Italian families she has met with has some members fluent with English, and they agree to help translate where Joe and Sophia are unsure. Excellent. You encourage the Maninis to come to you and ask you what something means if it is unclear. There's just one thing we should talk about now, you say. I'm wondering if you are having reactions in your bodies to what is going on. They're relieved. You mention how normal it is not to be sleeping well, to be having problems with going to the toilet, to feel dizzy or not hungry. Mrs. Manini says she is very, very sad. You work at normalising their responses. In the ensuing days, the Maninis have the opportunity to meet with some of the people who will help them get back to regular life. You introduce them to a representative from their bank who helps them get new banking cards. They're able to get set up for new driver's licenses, and you take them around to the medical station to meet professionals from the health clinic they will be likely to attend after some of them leave the shelter. You have also made sure that they know where to go for free counselling, following on from confirming that their home did indeed burn down. And they will probably attend Mass at the parish of the priest they met here at the shelter, as their own community's Catholic church was also destroyed. They meet with housing advisors about getting an apartment until their home can be rebuilt. And slowly and painfully, they are making the adjustments that will help them to restore their lives. But you know that they have done it all with alternating worry, grief, and hope in their hearts. There has never been confirmation that their daughter died, but then again, she couldn't be located at any other shelters, nor could Roberta. You feel so sad for the Maninis. All that changes in one joyous instant. The day before your deployment ends, Sophia whirls around at the sound of a familiar voice shouting, "Mama!" It's Marissa, tired but well, with Roberto at her side. After the hugging and tears have subsided, Roberto recounts his and Marissa's experience. I was leaving through the village, he says. It was already a ghost town, and I saw Marissa walking back home alone. She said she had left her friends, but didn't realize how close the fire was. I picked her up, but the only place we could get to before my car overheated and died was just an old storehouse, not an official shelter. Maybe it was too close to the fires. We and a few others without cars spent days there with no help, but unable to get anywhere else. No one's mobile phones were working, the network's down, so most people didn't know how to get in touch with their families, and no one came looking for us. I finally managed to get seats for Marissa and myself on a truck. I flagged down delivering supplies to the major shelters. At each one I asked the missing persons coordinators if they had a family named Menini or anyone looking like you, Sophia. Oh, no. It was not until I arrived here. Sadly, Marissa's friends' family were among those incinerated when their car melted in the heat, and they had no means of escape. Marissa will have to cope with those deaths in the coming days and weeks. You know that she will be well supported in this. Just before you are taken back to the bus station to go home, your supervisor asks you to sit down for one last time on your army cot, that's been your sleep station for 2 weeks, and reflect on your experience. You go through the assessment questions. Did I know key terms and concepts related to disaster mental health response? Okay. Kind of laugh about that one. You now know that, in fact, although you had memorized the 5 principles and 8 actions of psychological first aid, you were rather vague on terms related to the incident command system. Next time you say, did I have effective communication skills? Your supervisor answers this one for you, giving you the feedback that several of the survivors you engage with, most especially the Maninis, had high praise for your clarity of communication and capacity to understand intuitively what they were going through. Full marks there. Did I possess skills of needs assessment? Well, you reckon you didn't do too badly on assessing needs of families, such as the Maninis. For instance, you knew how important it was to get medical help immediately, and how crucial for their psychological well-being it was to spend major effort searching for missing loved ones. You admit, though, that you probably got a bit bored filling in the forms with people and trying to think of all those small, well, to you anyway, practical things that they might need. Not bad work, though. A bit of practice needed in this competency. Did I formulate and implement an action plan? Now, you did quite well on coming up with an action plan and on getting survivors to commit to doing their bit to implement them. Your supervisor praises you for having gone with people to make appointments, to do the appointments and to complete the appointments, to make sure that they got there, and generally made it easier on the shocked, exhausted, trauma-affected people to get their things going again. You believe that further deployments would help you refine how much to put in an action plan when people are still in shock from the event. Did I demonstrate self and peer care techniques? On this last competency, you reckon you weren't too bad at caring for yourself. Nightly phone conversations with your partner helped, as did your insistence of taking time out for stillness, quietness, even if the only place you could find to meditate was on your cot. You probably didn't eat as healthily as you could, though, and exercise regimes, well, they went out the window with the long days. You were available for peer care in the volunteers' tent, but that was a small proportion of the time. Watch this space, you promise yourself. You'll do better next time. Anyway, you tell your supervisor you're happy you came, you think it went okay, and your supervisor agrees. As you take your leave, you reflect that your first experience of offering psychological first aid has been challenging, yet oh, so rewarding. Partly you have families like the Maninis to thank for your enriching experience. You make sure that your name stays on the list for the next disaster. We've now completed our armchair deployment to a disaster. In preparing to go and serve on the front line of a disaster, in our case a shelter, set up a gym in case of fires, you're able to assess your readiness to enter the field. You decided that you were ready in terms of the 4 chief factors, the capacity to endure what you may see and experience in the field, your health, your family, your work considerations. You've had the opportunity, through the experience of the Manini family and others, to apply the 8 core actions of psychological first aid at a disaster scene. And remember, 1, contacting and engaging survivors. 2, tending to needs for safety and comfort. 3, stabilising survivors. 4, gathering information about needs and current concerns. 5, providing practical assistance. 6, connecting survivors with social supports. 7, giving information on coping. And 8, linking survivors with collaborative services. At the end of your deployment, you assessed yourself on the 5 main competencies needed when rendering psychological first aid. From knowing key disaster mental health terms, to communication skills, to needs assessment, action planning, self and peer care techniques, you're humbled at how much there is to know and to be skilled at. My hope is that this talk has whetted your appetite to get into the field in a disaster scene and practice this skill and craft.